I was a clinical psychologist for 40 years and started off very naive. I knew nothing about this deportation program. I thought it was an isolated historical event. However, the more I learned, the more I started putting different pieces together through a psychologist's eyes. As a result of that, I'm completely convinced 150,000 children were brainwashed. Some to a greater degree than others, but they all were. Until I hear otherwise, they all were. The younger the child, the more intensity of the brainwashing. In current times, we know all about cults and how they work. Even 100 years ago, people knew the impact of removing a child from his or her family. The immediate reaction, regardless of age, was called maternal deprivation. It puts a child into a state of permanent shock and fear. So step one was to physically isolate the children from their families. Regardless of the circumstances or how they were taken or the reasons for, the impact was the same. Once in care, children did not see their families again. The organizations made sure the family had no contact and no knowledge of where the children were. Families were powerless to do much about it. In order for a child to go into care, they were coerced into signing a thing called the Canada Clause. By placing a child in care, parents, guardians had to agree to the child being trained and emigrated out of the country. Without fully informed parental consent, many desperate parents signed the consent form. My grandmother tried for 4 years to get her 3 children back. She tried for 4 years to see them. Each request was denied. After you tell a child their parents are dead, you orphanize that child. I'm your mother now. You belong to me. Nobody wanted you. They abandoned you. They treated you badly. They were evil. They were corrupt. They were immoral. Pound that into a kid's head. All it leaves for the child is an imposed sense of guilt and shame. Shame for their families and guilt. I must have done something wrong. My father, when he was apprehended by the police, automatically assumed he did something wrong. In his notes, he said, maybe I ran away, maybe I got into trouble. This was a 3.5-year-old toddler. All of those faulty beliefs were reinforced. In the homes, they had something called the rule of silence. Children were not allowed to talk. Much more than children are to be seen and not heard. If they spoke, they were punished. The numbering system, all across the 50 organizations, until I hear otherwise, was designed to strip them of their former identities. You are boy number 14. You call yourself boy number 14, you call him boy number 13. You do not use your name ever again. We all know what it's like to be treated like a number. How about replacing your name with a number and addressing other people as a number? The rule of silence sure didn't help child development, language, skills, expressing feelings. No chance whatsoever, because the children were things, commodities to be processed. They were treated like animals and shipped to Canada like animals, accepted into the country once they talked to the Department of Agriculture representative. That's how they got into Canada. Department of Agriculture. Like black slavery in the States, advertisements were put in the paper to buy a child. You pick the size, the shape, the sex, the whatever. It was yours to do with as you will. Reward for good behavior was the more you complied, the more you were not necessarily rewarded, but less punished. My father wrote about the daily punishment circle. If you had so many offenses for looking, smiling, laughing, calling somebody by their name, everyone gathered in the gym at night in a big circle. The offending children, regardless of age, were brought into the center, bent over a table, pants pulled down, and they were beaten. They were caned. Every child had to watch. If a child looked away, if a child cried, if a child reacted, your turn. Every night they were in care. As per the cult program of current times, you make sure the kids don't get too much to eat because they might be healthy. You fed them bread and water if they were bad enough for day after day. You fed them moldy food. You put them in poor clothes. They slept on straw beds. Whatever sense of self was beaten and driven out of them. If you orphanize a child, children, especially under the age of 6, literally believe what they were taught. You're a good kid. I like you. I love you. Versus you, number 7, get over here. I'm your mother now. I'm your master. You are nothing. And it imposed tremendous sense of guilt and shame. Children are made guilty quite easily. A look will do it. The big lip comes out and it gets internalized. I'm bad. My family was bad. If they cared about me, they'd visit me. I guess it's true. I was abandoned. I did something wrong. Children were permanently scarred because of the experience, and it was compounded in Canada by how they were treated by their caretakers in Canada, who, by the way, were Canadians. I think the worst of the worst Canadians, if you know the expression, more British than the British. The British Canadians, chances are, were the lower class when they immigrated to Canada. They could make themselves feel better simply by having someone to control, dictate, punish, push around. There's no other explanation for how they managed to treat these children, because they didn't belong to anyone. If your identity is Bernardo boy, Bernardo girl, Quarger kid, you don't belong to anybody. So you're worthless, and I'll treat you accordingly. And on and on and on it went for almost 100 years. The process of brainwashing is you erase the identity the child has and you implant a new one. The Victorian goal was to create a subservient, passive, submissive class of people. Boys were to be farmers, farm laborers, one step above the animals. Girls were taught to be servants until they were 21, and then they could be a wife and a mother, maybe. That in the context of women were chattel, they had no rights, matrimonial rights, legal rights, they could be killed, they could be whatever. So whatever I say about the boys in care, it's 10 times as worse for the girls. And it went on a great long time. And the product was, as adults, people who were excessively ashamed of themselves. And that shame inhibited them from developing normal, healthy personalities. When they married, like any parent, the only guideline you have is the family you were raised in. But these children were taken away from those families, and the only models they had were controlling, punishing adults. So when they married and had kids, what did they know about how to raise a child? They had never seen a normal family in action. They did the best they could, but I think psychologically, in spite of themselves, they passed on a lot of messages to their children. To be nice, to be kind, to be respectful, to be considerate, to put others first, on and on and on. All very good qualities. Except if they're excessive to a fault, you wind up being in a position of brainwashing called desperate gratitude. If you've had nothing, a scrap looks very appealing.